The session today is Bringing the Past into the Present, Framji Minwala and Nomanul Haq in conversation with Aisha Jalal. I would like Dr. Aisha Jalal to please come up on the stage. Dr. Aisha Jalal is Mary Richardson Professor of History at Tufts University, USA, where she teaches at the History Department and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. She has taught at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Tufts University, Columbia University, and Harvard University. She has numerous publications to her credit, including The Sole Spokesman, Jinnah, the Muslim League and the Demand for Pakistan, and the Partisans of Allah Jihad in South Asia. Please give Dr. Aisha Jalal a big hand. I would like Dr. Nomanul Haq to join Dr. Aisha Jalal on the stage. And we'll soon be joined by Dr. Framji Minwala. Dr. Syed Nomanul Haq is a historian, noted specially for his contributions to the fields of Islamic history, philosophy, and literature in Muslim societies. He is professor of the social sciences and liberal arts at Karachi's Institute of Business Administration and serves as advisor of the program. Dr. Nomanul Haq, I would like you to begin the session, please. Thank you.
You can hear me, right? Well, let me welcome all of you here. Indeed, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to be talking to. Can you hear me?
I think you need to put this up.
Hello? Can you hear me at the back? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, good. I'll try to keep it closer here. Well, I was just saying that for me it is an honor and a pleasure to be speaking to Aisha Jalal. I take the liberty of referring to her without any salutations. And I have, always looked for opportunities to trap her and ask her questions. So this is a wonderful opportunity. Last night I spoke to Framji about the format of this conversation, and unfortunately Framji is not here, so the whole onus falls upon me. Let us see, I hope that he will show up very soon and join in the conversation. Aisha, you have been declared, not by me, but by top scholars, top historians of the world, as a respected, as the world's most respected and prolific and authoritative historian of Pakistan. Now, one of the things that I feel about you is that your writings have a bit of a magic. I am sold to language.
Sorry, I can barely hear you. I don't understand how anybody's understanding anything, because something is happening here.
Something is happening.
I can't follow you.
Let us see.
Maybe it's the...
Is that better? Is that better? Okay. So let me repeat. I was saying that you have been declared by world's top scholars to be the world's most respected, prolific, and authoritative historian of Pakistan. I was saying that I find kind of magic in your writings, your style, your coherence, the flow of your prose. You almost become poetic at times. I remember you saying that Pakistanis live in the twilight of myth and history. What a beautiful imagery that is, twilight of myth and history. Now, for the audience here, because this is not an academic seminar, we have everybody here, I really want to humanize you. You are a bit of a legend. You are a bit of a legend for Pakistan, but I want to humanize you. Tell me about your writing style and how did you develop it? And you could be so coherent and effusive, and your flow just continues unabated for pages after pages after pages. And this is one of the keys to understanding your influence, because you appeal. So can you do some real self-reflection here?
I have to say that there's a tendency in Pakistan to turn people into legends, icons, and I mean, this hyper-adjectivity in describing people, I think, is a bit ridiculous. I don't think I'm a legend. I've just done some work. But I do think that there's a tendency to put people on sort of ridiculous pedestals, and I think people enjoy to see them fall. Maybe that's why they put them so high. So I really would prefer not to be taken there at all. I am just a historian, and if my work has quote-unquote magic, it's because I have a great deal of passion for this country. I grew up in this country. My father was a government servant. I was privileged to hear, as a child, discussions across, around the dining table. We were not asked to go to bed. So I was always involved in this country. The only difference was that the sorts of narratives we heard at around the dinner table, I discovered when I was in New York as a teenager, were very different from the reality of Pakistan as it was being depicted, because I happened to be in New York during the 1971 crisis. So for 6 months, we were entertained to what was going on in then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And it made me question those narratives that I'd been hearing all my life with my father's friends and anybody else who dropped in. So I think that is what made me whatever I am, a questioning, passionate Pakistani who wanted to understand the history out of the box a little bit. I had questions, and that's all it is. But I don't think this iconic sort of status is quite justified. If somebody says I'm the best in this, that, or the other, it's their opinion. It doesn't mean it's everybody else's opinion. And I'm quite happy to, I'm not looking for any kudos. But passion is something that has driven me. Passion for this country, a desire to really lay the foundations and a thriving foundation for an intellectual tradition in this country, a critical intellectual tradition. These have been my goals ever since I was an undergraduate. And I guess I'm still striving towards it.
Yes. Aisha, many of us have the passion, but you have the added talent of embodying it in your prose. Have you actually cultivated a style of writing, or does it come naturally?
No, I think as a historian, one of the things that I've learned over the years, and I think it's only fair to say that when one is young and trying to go through the rigors of an academic degree, one is trying to impress one's peers and one's mentors and seniors, and one probably writes a little bit more complicated. And over the years, I've learned that, after I got my tenure, I'm interested now in trying to be accessible. But obviously, I'm not a popular writer. I have no desire to become a popular writer. I want to write substantive works that are accessible. But I have learned that the more accessible you are, the better it is. And so I guess that if I have tried to cultivate it, is to look for clarity and lucidity.
And do you, there's just one final question in this vein, do you revise your text a lot?
Of course, one edits all the time. Yes. There's no end to it. I think even at the last minute before the proofs are going in, yes, one is tweaking all the time.
Yes.
There is no end to that.
There is no end to that. Okay, your last book, you're so prolific that I don't know if there's a book in the meantime, but The Struggle for Pakistan that you wrote recently. There you talk about, it is more or less, to me, an biographical work. You talk about your own relationship with Pakistan, your own feelings, your perceptions, your reactions to different events that took place. And you say that you took up history both as a methodology and as a discipline. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think there's a great misconception of what history is in Pakistan. There is a confusion, first of all, between history and ideology. Ideology and history are not one and the same. History comes from a word historia, which is a Latin word, and it means to investigate. History is a methodology because it investigates. Unlike political science, which begins, or IR, which begins with a theoretical model, i.e., Pakistan is a failed state. So then you go and prove why Pakistan is a failed state, because that's your hypothesis. Historians don't work like that. Historians investigate the actual reality, and in any event, failed against, on what criteria? What is a successful state? By who, on what basis are you calling it a failed state? So I think the methodology is what it is, and history is a methodology in the first instance. It's to investigate evidence, not try to mold evidence according to your hypothesis. That, I would say, is what I think is an important one. It's also different from anthropology. Anthropology is about the present in the main. A history allows you to understand over a period of time what has changed and what has remained the same. It's important to understand those issues, which anthropology will not do unless, of course, good anthropologists also have the historical methodology. So I do think it's important to understand that when I speak of history, both as a discipline and as a methodology, that's what I mean. Unfortunately, as I said, in Pakistan, it's been reduced to a jumble of, I think, contradictory idioms for the most part, and which really sort of it's an ideological projection of Pakistan, which is, there's nothing wrong with it, but that is not history. That is ideological.
Yeah. Taking you back, Aisha, to your first work, your first book, The Soul Spokesman, which was kind of a breakthrough. Now, tell me, you have effectively cracked many hardened orthodoxies about the narrative of Pakistan. Is it possible for you to give us some highlights? I think that one of the core issues that you deal with is the Lahore Resolution of 1940. It did not speak of Pakistan, and Jinnah says that the word Pakistan really is an abbreviation of a longer phrase. It has been thrusted upon him. Now, this is something which people deny. They are in denial because it goes so much against the hardened narratives of ages. For years and years, people grew up in that. Can you just highlight it a little bit, going back to your very first
Okay,
speculation?
the reason why everybody can't stop talking about the first book, and I do want to make myself quite clear about it, is that, I was privileged at that stage to new sources that had just become available, and I was able to delve into them and produce a narrative called The Soul Spokesman. Now, people who have been since awaiting a similar sort of breakthrough. Now, the point is that I cannot conjure up evidence. In Pakistan, nobody opens up the archives. You go to individuals, everybody's writing a book themselves. Everybody in Pakistan is writing a book. They will never show you anything. So the point is that I am not a fiction writer. I am a historian. If I have access to new evidence, I will write a new part-making book. But if you do not allow me evidence or new evidence, then I will do different sorts of work. So The Soul Spokesman was based on British sources that had become available, Congress sources, Muslim League sources that had not been looked at. So I do think that people need to put things into perspective. Instead of demanding brand new ideas. You don't construct history, it's not a concoction. I know people are used to concoctions of history, but I do not write such history. Going back to what my book achieved was basically, I began with the question, how did a Pakistan come about which satisfied the interests of its main constituents so poorly? That was my question. And I've always tell students that if you are going to do a paper or a book or whatever, a manuscript, a thesis, the question has to be good. And this was my question. Now, why am I saying it satisfied the interests of its Muslim constituents so poorly? Well, here we have a Muslim homeland in 1947 that was supposed to serve the interests of all. It was articulated on behalf of all Indian Muslims. And yet, when Pakistan was created, 65 million of the 100 million or so Muslims in India became citizens of Pakistan, split between east and west and 1,000 miles of Indian territory. Another 35 million, making it the largest Muslim state in the world at the time. But also the 35 million who were left behind in India or Hindustan were the largest single Muslim minority in the world at the time. And I also hasten to add that in the year 2050, India will have more Muslims than Pakistan. So I'd like to understand as a historian, that's what a historian does, how that could be true. If this was the homeland for India's Muslims, how come such a Pakistan emerged? That is what I set about to do. And I discovered that despite all the emphasis on the religious difference that caused partition, there was overwhelming evidence to suggest that the regional dimension, or what I call the persevering federal issue in the subcontinent, was the driving force. This is not to deny that religion played a part, but the really important dynamic that has been underplayed are the regional politics that played a role in this making of Pakistan. So I do think that not understanding the federal principle in South Asia, which was what Mr. Jinnah really fought the case for Pakistan and won, has been a great detriment to understanding, and the confusion of identity that people feel in Pakistan has to do with that. So I think that what I was able to show was that the Pakistan that he wanted was a Pakistan that was intended to achieve something of a new power-sharing arrangement that would help Muslims in all of India and not just Muslims who became part of Pakistan. So Pakistan was meant to be a kind of an umbrella for Muslims in India too. Now, the narratives of Pakistan are completely contradictory, I'm afraid, because despite the fact that we've always said that it was raised on, the demand for Pakistan was raised on behalf of all Indian Muslims, people do not really consider what's happening to the Muslims in India. So I do think that these contradictions are the ones that I was able to explain. Now it's up to you, you don't want to accept them and you still want to believe that it was religion and religion alone that brought this up. Well, then you explain to me how come India has more Muslims and will have more Muslims in 2050 than today.
Yes. Yes, Ayesha, of course you cannot conjure up evidence. It is there or it is not there. But you can select evidence, right? And the process of selection is a theoretical matter. There is a framework in which you make selections, otherwise everything is relevant. And one of the discomforts that some critics have raised is that you do not pay attention to the Urdu press as much as you should have.
Look, let me just finish.
Yes, yes,
I mean,
yes.
The question is that everything has a place, and I mean, the problem with Pakistani sort of commentators, critics, is that there are two ways to review a book. One is to review a book and say that this is what the person is doing and this is what they're not doing well enough. But most reviews are written about the projects that the reviewer wanted you to do. It's their project, but they don't like the project you're doing. The point is that you have to understand that a writer has a project in mind. You may not like that project, but you cannot base the review on the book you wanted the author to write. And I think that's a completely stupid approach. It's wrong-headed and it's not to be understood. Now, I have used Urdu sources in my book, Self and Sovereignty, where it was apt because I was studying Muslim identity. The Struggle for Pakistan is a book not written for Pakistanis. It's a book written for a global audience. I am not going to cite an Urdu source that nobody in the world can access. So I think common sense is what dictates a project. One writes different sorts of things at different stages in one's life. Every project has its own requirements and necessity. The Struggle for Pakistan was the only book I've written on demand. I was asked to write it. Other books I write because I want to write them. So I think that that's very important. It was meant to be for a larger audience and not for a Pakistani audience. It was never written for a Pakistani audience.
Yes, let me be the devil's advocate for a minute and then we'll move on. Insofar as there are gaps in the narrative, if there are gaps in the narrative, owing to non-inclusion of certain sources, you will agree that it is important that one looks at those sources. It is important that one looks at those sources.
I mean, the point I want to be quite blunt is that there's only so much you can say in a book. Not everything can come in. I mean, you don't make a khichdi out of things.
Yeah.
You write a clear-cut narrative that is accessible. You have an argument. It is impossible in that context. I wanted to bring in more culture. My editor did not want that. Now, the point is that you have to understand that when one is writing for a certain purpose. So this notion, obviously, look, my book, you want to refute my book, please do research, do work. Don't just sort of write stupid reviews. You have to go and do the work yourself and do a better book. I'll be delighted. Let's see the book that comes that is even better. Now, if you want to fill in the gaps by writing, it's all about perspective, the scale. If it was a matter about writing about some aspect of Karachi alone, I'm writing a book on Pakistan. So the scale is different. So you have to understand that a project, the question you're dealing with determines how you do it. There is no set rule that says that you have to use these sources because this is a book on Pakistan. There is no such logic. It's the project that dictates your sources. And obviously the availability of sources. If I discovered tomorrow that the government of Pakistan has thrown open all the sources, literally, then I would put my students, because I have no intention of writing another book on Pakistan.
Yes. One of the very important analytical distinctions you make about religion is that religion can be a marker of identity, one, and it could be lived faith, right? And you distinguish between the two. Now, this is a very, very important fundamental conceptual analysis that you've made. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I mean, I guess you're talking about religion. I mean, I make a distinction between religion as faith. It's a matter of personal faith, and nobody really knows what your faith is and what my faith is. And then there's religion as a demarcator of identity, religion as a demarcator of difference. That is basically what we tend to speak about when we say that there are 50 Sikhs in this room and 20 Hindus in this room and 100 Muslims in this room. It tells you nothing about anybody's faith. So that's what we've been talking about. We've been looking at religion as a demarcator of identity, i.e. we look at religion as difference, primarily as a demarcator of difference, as othering. But it says nothing about those constitutive factors of faith. Somebody who wears a turban may not be the staunchest believer in the Adi Granth.
Yes.
And this can go on. So I think that's what I was saying. And analytically, while I accept that somebody who identifies as a Muslim and has a particular view, because Islam is an interpretive community. People interpret the revelation in different ways. Historically, they've done that. Those who are philosophers have one view, those who are mystics have another, then those who are jurists have another. And they've all existed historically in this narrative on Islam. It's an interpretive community. So the point is to reduce that and say that there is one religion, even because that's my view, that's an individual interpretation. It cannot stand in for the view of all community, the entire community. And we have to understand that Islam has flourished as a faith globally because of this multiple interpretive capacities and the ability to accommodate all these capacities over a period of time. The turn towards literalism is a very new turn historically. And I think people need to understand that this was not there to the same extent. I mean, I would say that I'm seeing some friends sitting here, that they would agree with me that even this country in the 50s and certainly as late as the 60s and 70s, there was much more openness than there is now. Now people just sort of tell you that your religion is wrong and mine is right, and that's the end of it. That's an undemocratic approach. Islam has coexisted with multiple interpretations depending on your standpoint. Are you a philosopher? Are you a jurist? Or are you a poet and philosopher? Or a mystic?
Yes, yes.
I think that's very important.
It is.
All equally valid interpretations.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes. Asha, I think that Ramji is here. Ramji is here. I think you used the phrase moth-eaten Pakistan.
I didn't, it was Jinnah's phrase.
It was Jinnah's, you quoted it.
It's not my phrase. It
I'm
was
sorry.
Muhammad Ali Jinnah's phrase.
My fault. It is you quoted him, moth-eaten Pakistan. And you talk about the Muslim minorities in India. And I think this is a very, very important issue because this is a kind of a crisis generated by partition. Now, do you think that the massive rioting we had and riots and killings and bloodshed, all this happened, was it at all foreseen by the Muslim? And how does one cope with this problem?
Well, I mean, I think that there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that there was no obvious connection between what the leaders were saying and the actions of followers in different parts of the world, i.e., nobody in Punjab issued an order on the part of the Muslim League saying, go kill the Hindus of Lahore or the Sikhs in Lalpur. Nobody did that. But there is no denying that people took it upon themselves in different parts of the Punjab, whether in Lalpur or in Lahore, to play into that discourse themselves, appropriate that discourse and make of it what they wished. There was certainly nothing foreseen by the leadership of this scale of violence. Having said that, in my book, Self and Sovereignty, where I used a large number of intelligence sources, British intelligence sources from Punjab, Sindh, police abstracts, it suggested that the British were pretty aware from much of the late 30s and 40s of the heightening tension in the rural areas of Punjab. Nothing was done at all by the British. And you find that ultimately the nub of the problem in terms of the violence, while there's no denying the violence in the urban areas of Punjab or condoning it, the violence in the rural areas was much greater in the Punjab. And there, instead of religion, the three main factors was zan, aurat, zar, wealth, and zameen. It's not coincident. It's just not a coincidence that zan, zar, and zameen constitute the bulk of the litigation in Punjab as well. So, i.e., it was the rural culture, material culture of the Punjab that played up at a moment of great dissonance when the British were quitting, when the Punjab was being partitioned along lines of supposedly religion. So people who found themselves on the wrong side of a arbitrarily demarcated Punjab were slaughtered, especially if they had property. I look at the youngsters sitting in the back and I can tell you that there are still 101, if not more, narratives of those Hindus who probably converted because they didn't want to give up their properties and move. We have not told those narratives yet. We are still fighting narratives to prove and point fingers and apportion responsibility to each other, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, when the truth is that we're all implicated. Everybody made mistakes. That's the basis from which you have to move onwards to understand partition and obviously also have some healing. There's been a lot of conflict-based discussion. Let's move on and talk about some healing. Everybody made mistakes.
Yes.
That's what I'd say.
Yes, and I understand that you have elaborated upon what I would see as a tension between provincial leaders on the one hand and
All India.
And All India, and this tension also explains a lot of what happened, what transpired after that.
I mean, you see, there I've made it quite clear that Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah was trying to articulate the Pakistan demand on behalf of all Indian Muslims, which meant that the interests of a province like Punjab, where what was needed were political arrangements, power-sharing arrangements with the regional communities, i.e. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, that had to come first. Instead, an all-India variant, because of Mr. Jinnah's priorities, was foisted on the Punjab with the result that partition was the only solution. And Bengal, on the contrary, there was an attempt in Bengal at the last minute to keep it united. Congress said the only way Bengal can stay united is if it remains within India. And so that was the death knell for any attempt for a united and independent Bengal. Jinnah said, what's the point of having Bengal without Calcutta? It's like asking a man to live without his heart. They are better off on their own, and I'm sure they will be in very good relations with us.
Yeah.
So I do want to point this out, and I do think that in this cloud of debate about religious animosity, you've missed out on the more crucial dynamics in South Asia. And where I am right, I believe, is the current politics of South Asia, where it is still regional federal issues that are in the forefront.
Yes. Am I correct?
Ramji,
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to one statement, then I would have given it over to you. Am I right in saying that partition reduced Jinnah from being the sole spokesman of the entire community of Muslims in India to a truncated community of Muslims?
Yes, but it also enabled the Nehru dynasty in India. Who could have, nobody thinks about counterfactuals when it's useful. And if there hadn't been a divided Punjab and Bengal, what would India today be looking at? You would have had no UP Bihar dominance. You would have had Punjab and Bengal calling the shots. So I would like to know how the Nehruvian dynasty would have worked. But having said that, as mischief making, I will just say that Mr. Jinnah did intend to share power at the All India level on behalf of all Indian Muslims.
Right.
Pakistan, that's the Pakistan he wanted, not a Pakistan where Muslims were basically cut off from the rest of India, because he believed in porous borders. And so that vision has remained difficult to fulfill, not least because it was based on two steps. One was the right of these Muslim majority provinces to group together to constitute Pakistan. Unfortunately, the partition of Bengal and Punjab made it impossible for him to use this bloc to demand an adequate share of power at the center. So basically, it was the failure of the power sharing arrangement at the All India level that led to Pakistan. That's all. So the mistake that is made all the time in Pakistani minds is that the presumption is that the Pakistan that emerged in 1947 is the Pakistan that Jinnah was after all along. Unfortunately, Mr. Jinnah, in 1944, at the time of C.R. Rajagopalachari's offer, and then at the time of the Cabinet Mission Plan, rejected the boundaries of Pakistan that emerged in 1947. That's when he used the term moth-eaten. Now, there's no discomfort with that reality, but the presumption that this is the Pakistan we were fighting all along basically takes away from the historical reality. I think Pakistan's case is much stronger and more realistic by acknowledging that Mr. Jinnah had to acquiesce in a Pakistan shorn of the non-Muslim majority districts of Eastern Punjab and Western Bengal. That's the history. It's only ideology that's going to prevent you from seeing it.
Yes. Ramji, over to you.
Yeah, so the question I was going to, so Asim Roy in India makes the complementary argument that you make, where he argues that Nehru and to a lesser extent Gandhi were arguing for a unified India while actually promoting in private conversations and discussions, in fact, a partitioned India. And part of the reason that Asim Roy's argument is that Nehru wanted a strong centralized state. So the division amongst the leaders of the All India political parties was really as much an ideological division as it was a political ideological division, as it was a different understanding of how this region could be reconstituted post-British.
No, I wouldn't, you're right. Mr. Nehru certainly wanted a strong center and did not want to share power. What's forgotten in this narrative, I wouldn't put Gandhi there because to be fair to Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, he opposed partition tooth and nail until the end and was consistent. Whilst Nehru was giving his Tryst of Destiny speech, the Mahatma was sitting in Bengal in protest. Yeah. But the man who did agree with Jawaharlal Nehru was a man called Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. Yeah. Now, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel is really one of the people who is underestimated in terms of his contribution to India. I think it may be corrected now. But he is along with VP Menon, enabled the integration of the Indian princely states. One forgets that there were 11 British Indian provinces in 1947 and some 565 plus princely states, big and small. So a weak center that would have, in the view of Nehru and Patel, would have made it more difficult to integrate the princely states, which is why it was better to let the Muslim League have its Pakistan and for them to have a strong center so that they could integrate the princely states. So by creating Pakistan and allowing partition to happen, the Indian National Congress lost a quarter of India, but was able to bring 40% of India into the Union. So it was not a bad deal. I think everybody lost from partition, but the Congress lost the least.
Yeah. So Javed Jabbar's argument is that in fact there was no partition, that there was no, Javed Jabbar, that there was no region to be partitioned, that there was actually British-dominated provinces, and then there were princely states. There was
there was a partition of Punjab and Bengal. You can't deny that.
But not a partition
that's the real partition.
Yes, but not a partition of India and
No, that's right.
Pakistan.
But that is the real partition of Punjab and Bengal. I've argued this for decades.
Yes. So there's William Dalrymple makes an argument that in fact there was significantly less social disruption during the incredibly exploitative years of the East India Company than there was once the Raj took over. That in fact the communalization, the sectarian strife, that much of that is a British imposition in India as opposed to a legacy that continued from the East India Company. Would you comment on that?
Well, yes, I think that if you look at the sequence, you move from a mercantilist state, which Sven Beckett has referred to as war capitalism, to a different kind of modern nation state. Under the British Crown, clearly changes are made. There's much more steady. From 1757 to the early 19th century, it's a slower process. They're not trying to overhaul everything. But after the rebellion of 1857, categorical steps are taken at the level of the institutions, even the martial racist theory to justify in recruitment in Punjab. All of these have contributed. The penal code, all of this played a role. The presumptions of the decennial censuses. So I do think it's important so I would subscribe to that. I think there was a lot more willingness to adapt to Indian culture, and there was almost a fascination on the part of the Orientalist British in the late 18th century than there was in the early 19th and onwards, because colonial difference became more important after that to justify excluding Indians from power sharing. So you had to emphasize colonial difference, which was not the case to the same extent in the 18th century. So I would agree with William there.
Yeah. So the legacies of all of this and the ways in which those impact our politics, India's politics, the relations between the two countries and amongst all of the countries in South Asia, how would you say that we can undo some of this?
I think that's an excellent question. And without sounding overly high-flown here, we do need a decolonization of the mind, which is really long delayed. And what I mean by that is that you need to move beyond the British presumptions about this region. Unfortunately, Angrez to chale gaye hain, magar unke supporters and believers are still alive and well. And so I can only say that much of the state apparatus that you inherited and haven't really done much with other than to destroy it, because I was saying yesterday that institution building has not been Pakistan's main achievement, far from it. What I'm trying to get at is that a lot of your discourses are still from 19th century colonial India. Whether it's the police, my friend is sitting right there, Salim Vaidi, police you can speak a lot about, is still the old British police system. So we haven't really done the job, and we're still seeing things in the way the British did, which is one of the major problems. Communalism, what do we mean? And all I'll say is that there are some very good historical works now that really question this, and if only they would be accessible and understood by the people of this country, we could, and in India, because India there's an equally big problem in terms of the narratives of the colonial state and the post-colonial narratives that have created these hardened categories of religion. You know, religion is important to everybody, but not all people 100% of the time are operating because of religious impulses. I think it's important to understand that there is everyday life as well. And it is not necessarily because of some surah in the Quran or some Vedas that you're behaving like that. So I think that is where the colonial construction of knowledge has left behind a very, very negative legacy. And we need to go beyond that. But for that, you need to understand and have history as a discipline. You need textbooks that enable you to understand it. But because the two nation states are effectively hostile nation states, they've centered on religion as the primary cause of this difference. But the causes are more complex, I would say. I hope that answers your...
Yes, I mean, at the end of your most recent book, Struggle for Pakistan, you argue in favor of democratic processes. And there are many in Pakistan today who actually think that democracy itself as a form of governance or as a procedure or a process is in fact the very problem that Pakistan has contended with and has seen to fail, that democracy itself has consistently failed.
Yes, because democracy...
Not yet. I think it's on now.
Democracy is a process, and you cannot turn it on and off. It's like turning on a tap on and off. You turn off the tap because it's giving you cold water, and for 1 year you turn it off and you turn it back on. What is it going to give you? It's going to give you black water, dirty water. So that's what happens. You don't solve the problem by freezing it in an authoritarian setup. You need to address it. And democracy, as I was saying even yesterday, is conflict. I mean, which world are we living in? Democracy is conflict. Human beings are in conflict. And you need mediational institutions. Countries where democracy has worked have created institutions based on checks and balances. That is what is needed. Pakistanis should be thinking of generating mediational institutions that will mediate and arbitrate differences and conflict. Not assume that democracy, but you see, authoritarianism is a mechanism where you basically dictate to people what to do. I just don't think that is what is plausible anymore in this world. And so, not least because of the technological revolutions that are taking place, I really do think that there is an overwhelming need to understand that democracy is conflict and needs to be mediated. And the focus should be there and not just... Yesterday I was proposing that the best thing that Pakistanis can do at this stage is to set up consumer defense leagues. Historically, that's what's happened the world over. Consumerism is something that you all understand. It's about you. It's not about the state and the good of the state. It's about you. But the consumer rights in this country, I think, really need to go a long way before we can truly make democracy a worthwhile business in this country.
So we need Elizabeth Warren in Pakistan.
Well, not just Elizabeth Warren. I think Elizabeth is very impressive, but I think you need a lot more defense leagues, consumer rights leagues, yes.
Yes. We have 15 more minutes left, and I have one final question, Aisha, and then I'll open up for the audience. The fate of history in Pakistani academia. Do you think that, what we have at the moment, the sort of crudely concocted ideological positions that are being taught, do you think that you see any hopes that it might be replaced by history as a discipline in the academia? What is going on?
Well, I have been, I must confess that over the last 6 years, and this is something we both have worked on, I bemoaned the absence of history as a discipline at many institutions, but there has been a change in the last 6 or 7 years. There's growing recognition in Pakistan about the importance of humanities and social sciences. I know there's a long way to go. But I do think that there's more consciousness of history. I'm teaching a course at LUMS, I'm proud to say, not on Pakistan alone, it's on China and South Asia, transnational Asia to be more precise. And there are 7 now, thanks to the program we helped set up, 7 or 8 history majors. It's a high-level course, and they're all history majors. And so what I'm saying is that there is a growing recognition, and the youth are the future. I am hopeful. I do think that, I mean, now Manan's book, which I have a blurb on in the back of the jacket, is an excellent piece of work. So Pakistanis are now coming up and taking control of their own history, and I hope to see more youth coming up and taking to writing their own history. So I think that will make a difference and make history a more acceptable genre for Pakistanis than it has been, because history has been seen as just a very boring device that successive governments utilize to give their point of view, and a new government comes and a new history comes. So I think that we need to put that behind and move on, and I think the future is with the youth.
Yes, yes. With this optimistic note, I'll open it up to the discussion, to the audience. So there we are. Go ahead.
I would like to request the audience to please refrain from making statements, only questions. Thank you.
Asha, thank you very much for your narrative. Can you tell me why the Cripps mission failed?
Yes. The Cripps mission failed because it was intended by Churchill and the Secretary of State, Lewis Emery, to fail. It was basically sent out after the fall of Singapore, which got Chiang Kai-shek very worried, and of course President Roosevelt very worried about the impending Japanese move towards India. So they needed to be seen to be doing something. So Churchill, then under a unity government in Britain, agreed to send out Sir Stafford Cripps, who was a Labour leader, because he would be more acceptable to the Congress leaders, and the intention was to help bring back the Congress, because the Congress was non-cooperating and the leaders were in jail. So the Cripps mission was sent out with a view to get them to cooperate, but it was sent out with very limited authority. So the Congress's demand was that we will cooperate, but we want the defense portfolio. Now the British were not about to give the defense portfolio to the Congress, and Mahatma Gandhi is famously said to Cripps, why have you come all the way from England with this post-dated check? Why post-dated? Because the promise that they were offering was dominion status after the war was over. So he says this is a post-dated check on a bank that is obviously failing. So Congress's rejection resulted in the failure of the Cripps mission, which was just as well for Mr. Jinnah, because the local option clause that everybody mistakenly thought was a concession to Pakistan had been given to provinces and not to communities, which meant that if Punjab wanted to leave the Indian Union, the Muslims of Punjab, who had a slight majority, would have to work with both the Hindus and the Sikhs to take the province out of the Union. Mr. Jinnah needed a strategy that was exclusively Muslim, because his demand was a Muslim demand. So the Cripps offer was undermining Mr. Jinnah's. So it was just convenient that it failed. But it failed largely because Cripps's hands were tied by Churchill, who never wanted it to succeed. That's what the papers suggest.
We have a question there.
Ms. Aisha Jalal, I would like your comments. Abul Kalam Azad has wrote in his book that his biggest mistake was that he didn't contest the position of President of Congress. He has in his book India Wins Freedom said that if he would have accepted, contested, he would have been a president of Congress and he would have been able to implement the understanding which was between Jinnah but Nehru came and Nehru sabotaged all these things. So if, and Gandhi said, it's the biggest mistake of my life. What's your opinion? Had Abul Kalam Azad been president of the Congress, the course of history would have been different?
Let me say something that if there was one man who could have revealed the inner thinking of the Congress High Command, it was Abul Kalam Azad. And 30 years waiting, we got those 30 pages odd. Biggest disappointment in my life was those 30 pages because he never divulged, even though he criticized Nehru. But that's as much as we can go. Now let me just say one thing to you, that I've already said that Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was opposed to partition and remained opposed to partition until the very end. As far as Abul Kalam Azad's assertion is concerned, I would like to point out, and I have enough historical evidence to prove it, that already in 45, he was articulating the view that this is a psychological problem for the Muslims. Accept the League's proposals and things will be okay. Nobody gave any quarter to Abul Kalam Azad's assertion because at that stage, the right wing in the Congress was moving in. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, along with Jawaharlal Nehru, were the machine politicians of the Congress. They were calling the shots, not Nehru, not Gandhi. So I think that Abul Kalam Azad's assertion is a little overstated because I don't believe that at that stage either Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel or Nehru were prepared to heed Abul Kalam Azad. So whether or not he was president of Congress is really redundant. Even whilst he was president in 45, he was being isolated in terms of calling for accepting the League's proposals as a psychological issue which will be sorted out after independence. So I think that there are some gaps in Azad's narratives, and I'm very sorry that there is nobody who can fill them.
You talked about the academic importance of history. Most of the students we get at the Department of History in the University of Karachi, they don't even know what history is. So what can you suggest some of the ways that we can get students interested in history at the primary, at the basic grassroots level? Because right now the students we get, they come reluctantly in public sector universities especially.
I hope to use technology to convince the youth of Pakistan and the children of Pakistan about why history is so much fun. So I want to develop and invite all people who are interested to develop, use technology to show that history can be fun and is very relevant to your own times and is in fact critical to your own times. It's not about the past, it's how to understand your present. So I'm working in that direction now. Which is taking a lot of my time because that's where I think the future lies. And I hope to address this, not by giving you lectures on historiography, but perhaps taking you through a gaming app and showing you why history is so much fun.
Yeah. I think part of the problem is that by the time students come to university, it's already too late.
Yeah, so
if they have been much
age.
younger.
I'm really looking at 8 to 10, targeting that group.
Aisha, thank you for...
We have a question here.
Sorry, go ahead.
We have a question here. I cannot see.
Yeah, one here and one
It's
there,
here.
and one in the back.
Aisha, thank you for breaking faulty Pakistani dominant logic and paradigms. As a historian, I'm interested, I'm right here. As a historian, I'm interested in how you would paint the Pakistan in the year 2050.
You know, historians are not crystal gazers, but we do look at trends. I think that, as I was saying yesterday, it is up to the people of Pakistan. There is no such thing as inexorable, inevitable processes towards failure or rejuvenation or whatever. I do see signs of positive development in Pakistan. I think that one thing that Pakistanis must learn to live with is that a disruption of the political process, however problematic, is not something that you can afford. After many cycles of these political processes, you will be able to get a more plausible, workable system. But the lack of patience and the desire for military intervention has really reached a point where it's a knee-jerk reaction, it's not thought through, it weakens the federation, and I think that probably if the decision is taken to use coercive powers, and I was saying this in my keynote yesterday, I'm afraid that then it's again a matter of choice, then human choice. You make a choice, then you face the possibility of some real trouble in Pakistan and not good for its future. On the other hand, if you go for a more robust federal union, then I think Pakistan has a future. I also think that the citizens of Pakistan should recognize that time to sit on your back and hope for something to come from the heavens is long gone. You're going to have to do it yourself. I proposed that you start with yourself, start with consumer defense leagues. And I say this to my Indian friends as well. Huge consumer market, no sense of your rights. You have to have a sense of your consumer rights. That's what drives American democracy. Oh, I mean, don't make fun of American democracy. Just because Trump is there, don't make fun of it. It's serious. Yes.
There's a huge disjuncture between the rulers and the consumer society, I mean, the consumer defense league, etc. You can only go that far. But if the powers that be don't empower you in any way.
No, let me just finish here because, the political rights of citizenship are what we talk about, and those rights are exercised at the time of elections. But elections are not a magic wand that you can just wave and expect democracy to work and then say, well, look, it doesn't work, so let's throw it out. I mean, but the point is that with social and economic rights of citizenship, you will strengthen political rights, make it more meaningful. And as I said yesterday, and I'll repeat it again, it could be a process by which we then challenge and undo this kleptocratic political culture that is here. But only when the people of Pakistan get their act together, and I'm not saying politically, I'm saying consumer rights. Know your rights. I mean, here you buy something from a shop by mistake and you want to return it and they say, no, sorry, we can't take it back. So consumer sovereignty is really, really important before your political vote right makes any sense. That's just reality.
Yeah, and may I add to that a little bit? So I think also people have given up, that people don't exercise their rights because they don't think they will get anything.
No, they think it's a slot machine. You put your coin and all the things should happen. There's no magic here. You've got, accountability requires constant watchdog. I mean, that's what's happening in India, and that's why India's democracy is robust. And that's why the US, whatever you may say, the pushback is extremely important. I mean, everybody's talking about the elections, but look at the pushback. That is what democracy is.
Yeah, and checks and balances, I mean, you see it working out in the courts right now. So.
Look at it. I mean, so I think that's important.
Please, your question is done. Yes, okay, please. We cannot hear you. Is the mic on?
Yeah, please, I'm happy to take as many. I'm in no hurry.
Please go ahead.
No, I have never called myself a historian of Pakistan. People have called me a historian of Pakistan. I've always described myself as a historian of South Asia. And a historian. If I want to today decide that my next question relates to the United States of America, which is very possible, then I become a historian of what? So my questions lead me. So far my questions were related to Pakistan and South Asia. I do think that history is a methodology, and historians obviously do work on certain regions. But to try and define someone's history and on the basis of their nationality is ludicrous. It should be based on their work. And if you will see, much of my work is South Asia based and not just on Pakistan. I've done work on Pakistan, but not exclusively. Having said that, I think that pretty much wraps it up. But I just want to say one more point, that because of proportion, I have never to this day, after teaching for decades, ever taught a course on Pakistan. All my courses are South Asia courses. I know that my own students teach courses on Pakistan, but to this day, I never have.
And this is not an ideological posture.
It's not an ideological posture. It's a reality.
So this past semester in the fall, I was teaching a course on the cultural developments in the 19th century in South Asia and their reciprocal relations to developments in Europe, which actually opened up an entire area of investigation that had not occurred to me, one, and two, that there is very little written on. So could you talk a little bit about why 19th century history might be important for us?
19th century
and political and
19th
social?
century is vital, but so is the 18th century. What I think you should all know is that between 1650 and 1750, there was a world craze for Indian cotton textiles. And then the way in which the English East India Company, and please note this from me, not the British East India Company, English East India Company, because as I was telling the LUM students, it's like saying that you are the Pakistan University of Management Sciences, and it's the same thing. LUMS, how would you like to be called from PUMS rather than LUMS? It's the EEIC, English East India Company, was selling these produce all over the globe. There was a craze in Europe to the extent that the woolen and linen manufacturers in Britain got very upset. So they petitioned Parliament, and Parliament in 1720s started a process of protectionism. Indian textiles were declared illegal. Wearing Indian textiles was a crime. Followed by France, followed by Switzerland, followed by Belgium, followed by Russia. So, you know, Indian textiles became illegitimate, and they turned the tables on India and through their own innovation created their empire of cotton. And I highly recommend Sven Beckett's excellent book on the empire of cotton. All of you should read it. So that will tell you why even the 18th century is so important. So it's really this transformation, the turning of the tables on India, a story that is extraordinary and something that we don't even realize. Because cotton, as you all know, is a very labor-intensive crop. We wear it and don't think about it. And what they did, it also needs a lot of land. And the British Isles, you know how big that is. Where do you turn? Well, you turn to overseas colonies. That's what made it possible. Cotton and the thirst for Indian cotton drove empire.
Yeah, so
there you are, cultural, and it's so related to everything.
No, absolutely. So the numbers that I read recently was that within a space of 200 years, India's share of global GDP went from 34%
That's the great divergence
to 3%.
Debate. I'm teaching this course at LUMS on this issue, transnational Asia. So the point is that up to 1800, 3/4 of the global GDP was India and China. Well, what happened? Well, the turning of the tables on cotton by the English East India Company. So I think that these are narratives, and I would encourage you to do more connected histories. And when you do connected histories, get out of Pakistan, you begin to realize how interesting and connected all our faiths. These days I'm working with China and South Asia. So.
Do we have time for questions?
Yes. Absolutely. Indigo, tea, opium. Let's not forget opium, because opium was legitimate. And what's beautiful is how things become legal and illegal. So I called it in my slide, textile terrorism. It's textile. Indian textiles were terrorist items. No, but it's true. If you go back, you see that.
Textile terrorism.
I think very crucial question in this session will be how to teach history in our schools. And curriculum, because teachers not teaching, it's basically
it's by rote. I think that along with history, the fundamental problem with our system is rote learning.
Right.
You know, students from good schools say that we are dictated to, that we actually don't read Shakespeare ourselves. We are just given notes. Our teacher reads Shakespeare, then we take notes.
They don't even do
the
that.
absence of analytical thinking is the biggest problem in Pakistan. And when because I'm at the receiving end, and I can only tell you that there are certain schools that produce analytical thinkers, and the vast majority can do no more than a descriptive, if that. So until we change the methodology and go towards creative teaching, education, rote learning has to go. It's killing the initiative of our children. It's not letting them be curious and exploratory.
Yes, yes. Aisha, you once said that Pakistanis cannot explain themselves. And I think that once they're able to explain themselves, they begin to engage. And history, once they are able to explain themselves, then they engage in the discourse. And this is what history does. It gives them a context.
No, but you know, history we've talked a lot about, but I'd also say that the sadness that I have is that Pakistanis can't express themselves very well in English after 16 years of English study, nor in Urdu, nor in Sindhi, nor in any other language. So I'm really troubled by this, what we've done here. The ability, I don't care what language you write in, but you need to be lucid and expressive. But we're creating a cognitive dissonance with our educational system. I know there are many wonderful people fighting and doing this, but until and unless you move away from rote learning to analytical thinking, we are not helping our youth.
Yeah. See, I'm being told that the time is up. I must thank Aisha profusely for being so generous with us, and thanks all of you.
Thank you, everybody. The next session in this hall is Nai Awaze, New Urdu Writers. The guest speakers are Sayyid Kashif Raza, Rafaqat Hayat, and Saima Iram. And moderator is Muhammad Hanif. Thank you.